Greetings, folks. This is Scott, and you're tuning into A Woman's Place, the podcast where we break down all the policies and politics that affect the 51%. That's right, women are half the U.S. population, and Ashley and I are here to give you the facts about how today's events are affecting them. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hello, Ashley.
Hi, Scott Osborne.
Oh, Ashley Brown. I neglected to. Yes.
How are you?
I'm excellent.
Good.
I'm very happy that we now have, I don't think it got proper recognition, these mugs that match our podcast logo. This is pretty impressive here.
Right. It is very impressive. And I feel like we have a shout out to one of your daughters, yes?
Yes! Who I said, hey, would you please do this? Vistaprint Shutterfly. And lo and behold, without much more, they came in my mailbox. So, how nice is that, huh?
Really nice. I love it. And I'm excited to continue our conversation on women in media.
Media 2, we're going to call this. We did an earlier show on media and talked especially about who makes the content and why it matters and what you can do, how you can talk to bookstores, how you can select your Netflix, how you can write to podcasters, etc., and speak up for more diverse voices, which benefits everyone. So that was our Media 1 show, and now we're on Media 2. Yeah. So should we dive right in?
We should. And well, before we dive in, I just want to say statistics always interest me. And for those that have listened to the podcast for a long time, I will often be the data nerd that's like, isn't that interesting? I'm probably the only one that finds it interesting, but the consistency of it's kind of like a third of podcasters, a third of less so with directors and all of that. But I just think it's interesting to see those trends and the
political representation. Women cap out in the U.S. It's about a third. That would be an interesting one to pick up. Many things, speaking roles in films.
Right.
They did a global study recently about the third of the speaking roles. So, right behind the camera, we've studied that a lot. It's much less. Female directors, camera women, editors, etc. That's way less than a third.
That's less than 10%.
That shows up a lot, the third thing.
It does. The third thing shows up a lot. So I'm just putting that out there as we could have a total data nerd show on.
No, I think we should put that out there and crowdsource it. Somebody's going to do a PhD on this. I want someone to pick it up and then research the hell out of it and let us know what they find. I think would be useful. What that is. Some mathematician person could do that.
That is such a better plan. Good idea.
Yes.
Good idea.
Yes. So it's out there in the world now. Why does that happen? Why does that happen?
And can I also say part of this conversation started with Scott asking me if I watched The Real Housewives? I think.
Yes, I did. Did you ever see The Real Housewives shows?
I know. And I think it's good to say, just for, transparency, I am not a big reality show watcher. So as we get into this, I'm really excited to kind of delve into some of that piece of how that shaped our
reality TV is on our plate. But I just want to go back to one thing that we talked a little bit about in show 1, and that's why representation in media is uniquely important. We've talked about, we did a show about women in the skilled trades who are very underrepresented, electricians, plumbers, etc., and why that could be a wonderful job for women, why they tend not to go into it, etc. But representation of women making media is uniquely important because of the way media shapes us. I mean, my electrician is great. If it's a man or a woman, they'll make the electricity, the lights go on, my laptop work. But media literally shapes how we talk to people, how we act, how we dress, what we eat, how we behave, how we parent, how we have sex. All of these things are shaped by healthcare, by the media we're exposed to, and our attitudes about other people, whether it's people we see in another country, people of other race, genders. We don't have all this exposure in our daily life. We get a lot of it from media, whether it's the books we read, the visual stimuli we see, that shapes our understanding of the world in a much more profound sense. So having diverse viewpoints making our media is uniquely important. It's not just, hey, If women are more electricians, they'll have access to those jobs. That's cool, but it doesn't shape our socialization the same way.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
think that's
like why media is uniquely important.
it's a very important point to start with because it is ubiquitous and from a very young age of
Yeah.
what we're being exposed to. So no, I think that is very smart and responsible to start with that context of why this conversation is so important.
And it's subtle and it starts young. It's not the kind of thing that hits you over the face. It doesn't have to spell it out in words. But if, just to pick one example before we dive in, if you tend to see women, how do I say this nicely? I know we have
Uh-oh.
FCC regulations.
I
If you
love
tend
it.
to see women in much more revealing clothing or nude far more than men, how are you going to slowly see how women should dress, how they behave, how you think about them? You know, what's important to them, what's important to men. If you see men speaking on topics like politics or economics, and women never talking about those topics on podcasts or on the radio or on news, who are you going to think understands those topics and knows about and has authority to speak about if those are the only voices you ever see and the only faces you ever see talking about politics or economics, to use those examples? Subtly, it's like, wow, women don't have a role there. Does what they say not matter? Do they not know about it? All of these things. And the cumulative effect of that is very influential on women and men. And it starts very young.
Well, and who's considered an expert? So
Who's considered an expert? Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a very, I think again, it's so ingrained in everything that we don't even notice.
So I'll give you an example. There was recently a study. I love, I run this organization through women's eyes, and we do gender equality through media. So I get to see all these studies because there's organizations that do great work here. So they did a study of 120 films across 11 countries. So we're not just on the US. And they found that women have executive roles, meaning positions of significant leadership, running organizations, etc., running companies. What percentage do you think were women out of 100?
I would like to say it's a third, but it's not.
Oh, that's a third is a good guess.
Third. I'm going to say 10%.
14%. 14%. So, then the high level politicians, again, politicians show up in all these different films, 9%, not even 10%. Okay. So think about the subliminal impact. And again, this is not just US, the subliminal impact when you go to vote and you go to check that box or pull that ballot for a woman who has always been the position of a high level politician in everything you've seen and everything you've heard. So that's why it has such an impact. That's just visual media, but there's lots of other, we talked about podcasts are some of the most skewed at the moment. Of the top 100 rated shows, half of them never have women guests, just don't even have women speaking on them.
That
So
seems crazy.
I don't know what those topics are that they think only men can speak to. I mean, I get it if you want women to speak about a uniquely female issue. Maybe we want to hear from women about menopause. Okay.
Sure.
I've actually, though, I've heard male podcasters who talk about health issues that talk a lot about estrogen and hormones and all because they're scientists, so that's cool. I'll listen to the man talk about that. He knows his science. But I guess, I have nothing wrong with men sharing the men's experience with each other, but half our shows, that seems like a lot. So I suspect what's happening is that things like politics and economics and certain other forms of popular topics for podcasts are seen as men-only spaces. In any event, so that's one. But I wanted to talk a little bit about reality TV because I asked about the Real Housewives.
Right.
And nearly half of US shows now are reality TV.
Right.
When a generation or two ago, there were scripted shows. That's how television series, obviously now we have streaming series, scripted streaming series. Reality TV came in and it's so inexpensive for production companies to make.
There you go.
It's also, frankly, one of the reasons that politics has moved into the entertainment sphere. It's cheap, Broadcasters and cable stations don't have to make anything. They just turn a lens on politicians and it becomes entertainment. separate topic. Reality TV is cheap to make. It's about half of our shows. Wide swath, but many studies have been done now about the stereotypes that are frequently perpetuated. This is everything from the Survivor shows to the Bachelor and the Bachelorette.
Mhm.
You've got the Real Housewives. Every few years something else will cycle. Some of them are phenomenally popular in the past,
Mhm.
really 20 plus years now. Um, and they tend to be totally ripe for hyper gender stereotyped, meaning,
Right.
women in very revealing clothing, women talking mostly about appearance and about other men, eyelashes that open the door for you before you get to the door. I mean, just very hyper feminine kind of tropes. And behavior characteristics, emotional, manipulative, kind of scheming, competing with other women for a man's attention,
Right.
very stereotyped, uber feminine, quote unquote, behaviors, um, and male behaviors similarly. Tend to be dominant, tend to be more stoic. They might exhibit humor or anger, but those are the emotions that they show. They don't really talk about their emotions very much. They exhibit a predisposition for women who are hyper focused on appearance, but also treat them somewhat dismissively, like they know women are focused on that, but they don't really take it seriously. So
Mhm.
men also portray these behaviors. And what's interesting is when you poll, I will say, your average person, that's not really who they think of as real people. We all live in the world where we don't just see women acting like that, where we don't just see men acting like that. We know people are broader than that.
Mhm.
And yet this is the images that are played back to us. And with time, it has a phenomenally shaping impact, I guess I would say. Another example is this is a deep one. This is why we have to have a show on sexuality alone.
Mhm.
Women are typically shamed for sexual behavior, and men are typically celebrated for similar like-minded sexual behavior. And that fits exactly with our stereotypical male-female boxes. Women should be chaste or at least pretend to be, even if they are sexually active. And for men, this is a mark of pride, and it's a competitive thing with other men that they are more sexually active.
Right.
So you see that really writ large in these shows. If the audience has not listened to our shows on the book Credible with
Mhm.
Deborah Turkheimer, who talked about
Yeah.
sexual assault and how we see men and women, go back to that small footnote. So reality TV is out there. It's really having an impact. It's very hard to get a control group and say, so people who don't see reality TV, how does they see the world? Because we have so many influences. So it's a very hard thing to prove, but all of the signs are there that we know this media, constant stream of it, has an impact.
Well, and not just on the gender stereotypes and the gender tropes, which are, I mean, like cat fights, all of it, but the lifestyle that's being portrayed
Yeah,
in
yeah,
these that
yes.
are so far removed from the reality. And maybe that's part of it. And, you know, I want people to enjoy their entertainment as much as the next person. Like, I get that part of it's just checking out and enjoying something that's fantasy or not. But, I just go back to the number of young people that a career path today as an influencer or having a reality TV show or having this it's like it's so odd of just the expectation it's setting for what normal is, including behaviors and
Mm.
including. So I don't know. There's some I think there's real pitfalls in a lot of different ways.
Well, and the media companies or the production companies will say that they're just reflecting what people want. So, for example,
Mhm.
if a show is heavily focused on consumer interest, this is a bit,
Mhm.
consumption, excessive consumption,
Mhm.
really obsessive attention to forms of consumption, competition for whatever it is that we're consuming, you know. I mean, that goes back a long time, certainly. We have a consumption-oriented society. So are we just replaying what society is living like, or are we really being shaped by this as a society? It's been argued extensively in the area of violence, especially for children. You know, we have a phenomenally violent society. We have far more guns than, you know, the rest of the world put together in civilian hands. So is that our shows that we have that are violent in all its forms reflecting American society, or are they also then turning around and shaping us in how we think, what we think is normal? The cop shows, the Law and Order shows, you know, it's well documented that people see more of those shows. For example, you know, cop shows, Law and Order, perceive of our world as less safe. So we know that if you see more cop shows, true crime, drama, which exacerbates, or I should say exaggerates, the risk of crime, especially in cities, is often very popular. People then will have a much more heavily inflated perception of real crime. If you say, hey, what do you think is like the homicide rate, you know, in some city? People who watch more of those shows might definitely think it's higher. This makes sense to us. I mean, you know, this is how we absorb the world. This is how we get our ideas about what the world looks like. We don't sit there and say, as you just mentioned, oh, this is fantasy, this isn't real. You just sit there and absorb a show for an hour.
Right.
So the formative impact of all of those experiences is large. And should we talk a little bit about children's TV? Because that's
I was just going to say cartoons, because it starts really young.
Really? I mean, there was a reason why Sesame Street, I don't know, Sesame Street still exists in some formats, but why they wanted to have more, I guess I'll say wholesome educational TV, because you know, some generations grew up with cartoons, and some of it now is iconic. I mean, it practically has cult following. Some early cartoons that were phenomenally creative. Before they had the CGI and the technology, they were very creative. But content-wise, it's like this is what these kids are being fed for hours at a time. So things like the Disney princess shows and the tropes and that Disney has purchased up. The cartoons, though, cartoon images, and those are highly gender disaggregated, meaning the women and the girls in cartoons tend to be almost cartoon characters physically, you know, with these huge boobs, with these hourglass shapes that no one has, you know, so very exaggerated. And the men and boys, especially in the adventure shows, likewise have this very super large He-Man shoulders and body, which again, no one has in real life. But these are the images of those cartoons that children are often fed for many, many hours. And the behavior of these characters also follow stereotypes that women are more domestic, they're more caring, they're more outwardly affectionate. Men are more aggressive. They tend to be much more directive. And again, as I've said often on the show and other places, there are a lot of men who are very caring and domestic, and a lot of women who can be directive and authoritative. But these shows perpetuate that, and this is what children are getting for hours and hours and hours at a time. So there have been some cartoons. Some people know the Dora the Explorer. There's this thing called Puff the Powder Girls. I'm sure there's some newer ones. I don't always follow the research too frequently where you do get exceptions. It would be nice. I'm going to take a vote on this. It seems to be where they cast women or the girl characters. Why everything has to be genderized is another story. You know, everything this is inanimate somehow has to have a gender. But the girl characters, there seems to be a push to expand. I wish there would be somewhere you would see the quote unquote boy characters as a little more like the empathetic and participatory and cooperative. It doesn't have to be the violent He-Man kind of role. That would certainly be welcoming for a hell of a lot of boys who might feel that that's much more reflective of who they are and what they feel like. Maybe they don't feel like these adventure characters and don't want to have to live up to that image. I mean, I know from my experience teaching middle school boys, they struggle with some of these images too. This is not just girls don't, you know, look and act like this. It's also boys don't. So I would put in a plug for whoever makes cartoons. It'd be nice to see some cartoons of some more, I'll hesitate to say, but I'll say the word normal acting children in terms of the roles that they play and the behaviors they exhibit.
Well, and I think again, going back to that, being aware of how just all of this works to create what our attitudes, ideas, expectations, judgments, like all of those things, media is such a powerful tool in shaping the narrative of people's thoughts.
Yes. I mean, we know this from history. Some of them now are sort of iconic. I think it was it Mr. Rogers? I hope I don't mix this up, but who very famously, this was many years ago when racial segregation was quite rampant. It was in the early time of the civil rights era, if I'm not mistaken, did a show with a black man, and it as normal social relations talking, and I think they were swimming or something. I don't remember the details, but it just like blew up that this was a powerful statement that a television show had chosen to make a statement. I mean, we all know that how Ellen DeGeneres, when she came out as gay, and it was, gee, hey, sorry, my dog's just come in. The impact on that, and was she going to lose her show? It seems like ancient history now, but the impact of some media on having us think differently about some of these seminal social issues. All in the Family did shows, very, very old show.
Yeah.
They would take on, quote unquote, social issues that America was the world was dealing with, and change people's thinking. So the same way that you can change people's thinking to be, I guess I'd say, more accepting, you can also change people's thinking to perhaps be more stereotyped or traditional or less accepting in any number of ways.
So, and it's really interesting. I'm going to take a slight left turn, but talking about commercials. And it was really interesting as companies, it felt like we're trying to be more reflective of who families were, and that there were biracial families, and that there were heterosexual families and homosexual families, and so showing
all look different,
and what the impact that had on some was just like, why do we always have to have now all of this different representation, and why can't we have a traditional? So it's really interesting how things impact people when it pushes against what their view of normal is. I'm going to say normal. So, which I think anytime something disturbs you, that's when you have to check on the why and do a little digging into it. Do you have some deep-seated biases that you're unaware of? Or so I think just asking people to think about that. Like, if this conversation is rubbing somebody the wrong way, of like, well, what difference does it make? Of like, maybe do some thinking of what your biases are that you bring to the table every day. So,
yeah, good point. I guess I have two observations. I mean, I think even earlier than, another social issue that media took on that helped us see ourselves reflected was divorced characters and step parenting. I mean, so much of America in certain generations, certainly my generation, were in homes that did not have a perfect nuclear family, and then step parents came into the fore. Remember the film The Brady Bunch, very early television. So these things all, to some extent, they reflect who we are, but it shows the impact of all this media. Now, you're right then that is there some point where there's a backlash? The same way that I say, hey, I don't want to just listen to podcasts or see shows where men have all the roles. That's right. It's like, could I see some? Sure, I could see some. Do I want to see it all the time? No, I'd start to feel like, hey, I want maybe some things that represent my life a little more. Could you then have a backlash? Could, for example, there not be enough shows about let's just say a white nuclear heterosexual family? Maybe there aren't enough shows on that now. So how do we reflect that? Is that a pendulum that swings? So if you are feeling like, hey, I'm not reflected, whatever you're coming from, a religious
Mhm.
perspective, a political perspective, etc. They're absolutely from every angle. It could be a way of saying, hey, I'm not reflected in media, which really just goes to show how much we understand the impact of this and we put value.
Mhm.
So I guess I would say some people at some times want to see different perspectives.
Mhm.
Talked in the last show about international shows about Afghanistan or Iran,
Mhm.
for example, that showed us a human side, not a
Mhm.
political or a military side, and how much we welcome that. That's not reflecting me. It's not reflecting my life, but
Right.
it's something new into it. So, do I want to see other things that reflect my experience sometimes? Sure. And I think we all probably want both at different times. We want to be exposed to things that are unfamiliar to us, that are outside our lived experience, whatever that is. And sometimes we probably enjoy seeing things that give us a little validation and acknowledge our lived experience. I think they both can coexist, though.
I absolutely think they both can coexist. And so I want to talk about as we wrap up, what can we do? What should we be looking at, thinking about, acting upon?
Sure. Well, we talked a lot about looking at who is creating the media that you
Mhm.
see, whether it's visual media, podcast, radio. It's harder to tell with advertisements. They sort of
Mhm.
flit in front of us, but anything that you can tell, books, we also have talked about other forms of media, but which have an impact, artwork, for example.
Mhm.
Be aware who's making it. Look it up. Think to yourself. Try to actively seek out some diverse perspectives. That's the first one. Start with that. As you know, I run a film festival and we showcase films made by or about women. And I always tell people that you've been going to a men's film festival your whole life. You just didn't know it because, it was just the norm.
Mhm.
So seeing things from different perspectives can be helpful. Um, that's the first one. The second one is you can actually provide feedback either with your consumption dollar. Maybe you're not watching the Netflix shows that don't have enough diversity because you'd like to see some other
Mhm.
perspectives. Maybe you are writing to the podcast hosts that have no female guests. We said in the last show that half of our most popular shows have no female guests. Presumably, there are women that could speak to some of those issues they're talking about. So you can provide some feedback to them.
Mhm.
You can certainly support organizations. I'll tell you just one. It's called the Fuller Group, and we'll put it in the show notes. They're a global newsroom dedicated to reporting on serious journalistic reporting on issues that aren't getting enough media attention, that concern women that people should know about. We know there isn't enough content about women's issues in most of our mainstream news. And if you look at their website, get their newsletter, fascinating issues that they report on, and you'll say, hey, I never knew that. Why is this not getting more press? So there are also organizations that you can be supportive of that try to bring some of this diversity to screens, books, podcasts, all the different media.
Well, and it starts with being aware.
It does start
And
with people. Like
and
so
it
many things. Like
it
so
is it's like so many things and being aware. And then I do go with, if something makes you uncomfortable, dig a little deeper. Because I think you're in a moment of learning. So that's what I'm going to go with, Scott. But as always, interesting conversation. If you didn't check out the first Women in Media one, check it out. And I would encourage people to, especially that are local to our area in Sarasota, to check out Through Women's Eyes. It's a great way to get engaged in this topic and see films and things that are from a female perspective. So, as always, good to be with you.
thanks, Ashley. Take care.
Take care.